All right, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the Local Government Small Business Assistance Advisory Group meeting. We have two formats for participation today, the Zoom web application as well as teleconference. Please silence your other communication devices such as your cell or desk phone so that there aren't any disruptions during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for committee members and AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raised hand button. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to make a comment. Your name will be called when it is your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Speakers will be limited to a total of 3 minutes for the agenda item, and 3 minutes at the very end for public comment. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. Please note that you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please adhere to speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or being dropped from the meeting. And that's it, Vice Chair. You're muted, Vice Chair.
Thank you. My apologies. It is 11:30. We're going to call the meeting to order. And we can go ahead and do a roll call, please.
Mr. Aguirre? Oh, he's here. Mayor Arizmendi?
Present.
Mr. Avila?
He's here. I see him.
Yeah, he's here, yeah. Mr. Blake? He's here too. Mr. Campbell? Ms. Daniel? Mr. DeWitt?
Here.
Mr. Lamar?
I'm here.
Ms. Louv? Mr. Marquez?
Present.
Mr. Rothbart?
Here.
Supervisor Rutherford? And Chair Benoit.
I'm here. All right. Well, first, for my opening remarks, just want everybody know that it did come to our admin committee meeting to reappoint everybody that's currently on the body. And I'm happy to say that everyone was reappointed. And yep, so that's good news. No issues there. And with that, we'll go ahead and get into the meeting minutes for December 11th from last month. Anyone have any questions on the meeting minutes? Not seeing anyone jumping up and down. I'll look for a motion on the minutes.
I move approval. Second.
Chair Benoit, did you want to check for a public comment?
Sure, will do. Is there any public comment? Not seeing any. Did the clerk get who first and seconded there? It was Bill, and then I'm not sure if David got maybe the second or someone else tried to speak. There you are, Jeff. Wasn't sure. Okay. All right. With that, will the clerk go ahead and call the roll?
Mr. Aguirre?
Yes. Sorry.
It's okay. Mayor Arizmendi?
Aye.
There you go.
Mr. Avila? Mr. Blake?
He's on there someplace.
Yeah.
We need to hear their actual vote.
Their votes. Yeah. Mr. Blake?
You're muted.
Yes. Did
you hear me that time?
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Mr. DeWitt?
Here.
We're voting for the minutes. It's yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Ms. Lou? Mr. Marquez?
Aye.
Mr. Rothbart?
Yes.
And Chair Benoit?
Yes.
Did you get Todd Campbell?
Campbell, aye.
Sorry. We didn't see you on earlier. I'm sorry. I got your eye.
Don't worry.
I almost didn't recognize him with those glasses on.
I know I'm getting old. Sorry.
Aren't we all?
Motion
We're all in that
passes.
game. We're all in that game together. So that's good. All right. With that, we'll go to the follow-up and action items. Derek?
Thank you, Vice Chair. So we've got a couple action items. The first one is, the first action item was confirm with staff if providing request reports to the advisory group is acceptable. If so, provide information regarding the number of permits issued for UV and EB equipment, as well as policy memos if available. Legal confirmed it is acceptable to provide information to members, and this request was provided on January 5th, 2021. Engineering permitting retrieved one policy memo regarding UV/EB coding. This is publicly accessible through the engineering and permitting policy pages. We gave the link. South Coast AQMD currently has 108 active permits issued under permit codes for BACT that specifically identify UV drawing. There are some limitations to the data, as most codes used in engineering permitting database do not provide this level of detail in regards to the coding materials used, and also certain equipment using UV, EB under certain amounts may be exempt from a permit. So we did provide that. The second action item was to clarify procedures for the advisory group to provide support for items and provide updated LGSBA charter. Information regarding these procedures was emailed to the members on July 5th, 2021. In general, LGSBA's charter explicitly allows for making recommendations. The advisory group may adopt formal recommendations for action by the governing board to be taken to the administrative committee. Such recommendations shall be placed on the advisory group's agenda and shall become effective upon vote by no less than a quorum. The recommendation shall be presented to the administrative committee via a written memorandum or letter, or by presentation by an agreed upon representative of the advisory group. And those are the only action items. You're muted, Vice Chair.
Sorry, one of those mornings. Anyone have any comments or questions on those action items? Rita, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Derek, thank you for the report. I just had a follow-up question on that. You said something went out on January 5th regarding the UV and EB policy memo?
Yes.
Okay, I'll look for that because I don't recall seeing that, but thank you.
Okay.
And then if I didn't get it, I'll follow up with you after the meeting.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
But it was emailed to all of LGSBA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Don't see any public comment on this. We'll go ahead and go on to the next item number 4, the adoption of the local government small business advisory group 2020 accomplishments and goals for 2021.
Sure. I won't go over them, but we made the recommended amendments to it to add on a couple things, and we've done that. And so this item is just to approve the goals and objectives for 2021.
Very good. And I see Supervisor Rutherford's joined us. Welcome. All right. Anyone have any questions on item number 4 or comments? All right. Any public comment on this item? All right. We can go ahead and if anyone has any questions or comments, if everyone's comfortable, we can go ahead and I'll take a motion.
Move approval.
Second, Arizmendi.
Second.
Sorry, Todd, you were late to that one. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and take a roll call.
Hey, Mr. Aguirre,
Yes.
Mayor Arizmendi,
Aye.
Mr. Avila, Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Aye.
Mr. DeWitt,
Aye.
Mr. Lamar,
Yes.
Ms. Loof,
Yes.
Mr. Marquez,
Yes.
Mr. Rothbart,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
and Chair Benoit.
Yes. All right, with that, we're on to item number 5, the air quality in 2020 smog, wildfire smoke and emission changes. Dr. Epstein, go ahead.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So my name is Scott Epstein, and I'm the program supervisor of the Air Quality Assessment Group. And if you want to move to the next slide. Okay, so I have what I think is a pretty interesting presentation lined up here, kind of looking back at 2020. And first, I'm going to talk a bit about the ozone data that we saw and trends in ozone data. And then we'll try and identify some reasons why we saw such an abnormal ozone year this year, such as meteorology and emissions. Then we'll move on to PM 2.5 and talk about what we saw with PM 2.5, which is a far rosier picture. And then talk about a bit on the policy implications side. Want to move to the next slide, please? So there are many factors that influence ozone concentrations. I've showed this slide, I don't know, 20 times in the past, so you may have seen it before, but it's good to just review. So the first factor, which is probably the most important affecting long-term trends in ozone, are emissions. And we know that Knox and VOC emissions drive ozone concentrations. They come from sources such as vehicles, wood smoke, consumer products. Vegetation is also an important source of VOCs, et cetera. And then the other factors are more on the meteorological side. So temperature affects ozone levels, and this works in two ways. One is that the reactions that make ozone speed up at high temperatures. And then the second method is that there's more emissions of both VOCs and NOx on high temperature days. That's why paint dries faster on a hot day than it does on a cool day. You get more of those VOC emissions. Season also affects ozone levels. So sunlight is a key component to forming ozone. You need NOx, VOCs, and sunlight. So those long days with high sun in the summer tend to have the highest ozone levels. And then mixing and ventilation are very important. So it's common in our area to get an inversion layer. So the way that works is under typical conditions, air heats the surface of the earth. That warm air rises just like a hot air balloon would rise, and then that mixes the atmosphere. However, it can happen pretty commonly in our region where you get a layer of cool air trapped at the surface, much like if you have a hot air balloon that's cold, that cool air just hangs around. It doesn't rise and you don't get mixing. So you get this stable air layer, and then everything that you emit into the atmosphere kind of hangs around right at the surface. So that can lead to high concentrations, both ozone and PM 2.5. And then also concentrations are influenced by horizontal winds that affect how well our basin gets ventilated. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a busy plot, and if you just zone out too much, you may see some weird things in here. But basically, this plot shows the maximum air quality index that we recorded in the South Coast Air Basin on every single day since January 1st, 2010. So each day has this kind of vertical bar, and it's colored by the air quality index, which the key is down at the bottom. So just for context, orange and above means that we did not attain the 8-hour ozone standard on that day. So from this plot, you can see a pretty clear pattern, obviously, that, ozone tends to be worse, from the, from the early spring to the late fall. We get a reprieve during the winter time, like now. And then you can look a little more at the 2020 ozone season, kind of compare it a bit to the previous years. So you can see that our ozone season started much earlier than it has really in past years, kind of with a heat wave that we had in late April, if you remember that, and then lasted well into October. And we really stopped seeing exceedances very early November. Next slide, please. So another way of looking at this same data is aggregating the data by month. So there are two plots here. So the upper plot shows kind of the average behavior that we've seen from 2010 to 2019. And the height of the bar indicates the number of exceedances we record on average per month. And then the bars are colored by those AQI categories that exceed: unhealthy for sensitive groups, unhealthy, and very unhealthy. So when there's more purple, it means not only did we exceed, but those exceedances were worse. So on average, we record on order of like 128 ozone exceedance days per year, which is very high and the highest in the country. And then if we look at 2020, the story gets a lot worse. So we had 158 ozone exceedance days. So that's 30 more than average over the past 10 years. And then if we go to the next slide with this little animation, you really see some stark differences in these shoulder months in April and May, and then also in September and October this year, where we saw far more ozone exceedance days, and then also a lot more purple and a lot more red during those months. So if we go to the next slide, so this is slide 7. So we can also look at this data spatially. So ozone concentrations were abnormally high throughout the entire basin. And some of these values were incredibly high this year. So for example, our basin max 1-hour ozone value was recorded in central LA, which is typically one of our lower stations. And that value was 185 ppb. And that was the highest reading we've had in Los Angeles since 1994, and highest in the basin since 2003. And we've made huge strides since the 90s and the early 2000s. So this was very notable. Our basin maximum 8-hour value. So since this slide was created, that 145 ppb got invalidated due to some issues with the air conditioner at that station. But the highest value in the basin we recorded was 139 ppb, which is still very high, highest since 2006. So the key take home from this was that not only were the values high, but we saw high values in stations that are typically low. Like look down at Mission Viejo, for example, in Orange County. That's typically one of our lowest stations. And we recorded very high values this year. So now we can look a bit about how this year has affected our progress towards attaining the ozone standards. We go to the next slide. So this plot shows trends in ozone concentrations from 1980 to 2020. And we use these sort of strange statistics, but we pick them because they're the statistics that are used to determine attainment. So the blue line shows the 8-hour ozone trend. And what we do for that is we pick out the 4th highest 8-hour value in a year, which is used for the standard. And then the red line shows the 1-hour ozone trend, and that's the 2nd highest 1-hour ozone trend. So if you can notice the uptick that we saw in 2020 for both 1-hour ozone and 8-hour ozone. So first, we'll talk a bit about attainment of the 1-hour ozone standard. So our attainment year is 2022. So that means that to show attainment, you show the 3 years up into the attainment year. So that means 2020, 2021, and 2022. And assuming that this preliminary data stands and gets validated, we have already, based on just this year alone, we've already missed attainment of the 2022 1-hour ozone standard. Now, the 8-hour ozone standard is a little bit different story. So our next attainment year is 2023. So that means that we'll be looking at 2021, 2022, and 2023. So this year has not thrown us out of attainment of the 8-hour ozone standard yet. So, you know, we'll start to look at that data looking into 2021. Okay, if we move on, we'll look a bit at the Coachella Valley. So the story in the Coachella Valley is far rosier. So first, if you notice, the red data, the 1-hour ozone data is below the 1-hour ozone standard. So we've attained the 1-hour ozone standard in the Coachella Valley for a while now. And then also the 8-hour ozone data is pretty close to the 1997 8-hour ozone standard. So that like upper blue dashed line. And you can see that 2020 was a bit higher than what we recorded in 2019. 2019 was the lowest year on record for ozone in the Coachella Valley, but kind of within the realm, kind of right around that standard. And once again, this will not affect attainment because 2023 is the attainment year for the 8-hour ozone standard in the Coachella Valley. So that means that we'll be looking at 2021, 2022, and 2023. So the obvious question from this data that I'm sure everybody's asking is why were concentrations so high in the South Coast? If you go to the next slide, please. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of these factors separately. But first, I want to talk about temperature. So next slide. So we established early on that high temperatures are really important for ozone by increasing the ozone formation rates and then also increasing the emissions of both natural and human sources that lead to ozone. So these plots show how warm each of the months were in our region compared to the historical record. And you can see that several of the months had much above normal or record warm temperatures throughout the basin. It turns out that all in all, this was the third highest summer on record in the South Coast and the first hottest summer, the hottest summer that we recorded in the state. If you move on to the next slide, please. So now we'll touch on mixing and ventilation a bit. Next slide. So this is slide 13. So the top plot shows the average high temperature in Los Angeles on the highest ozone days of each season from 2015 to 2020. So you can see on those highest ozone days, 2020 was hotter than past years. And then the bottom plot shows the average basin ventilation on those same days. So not only was 2020 the hottest, but it also happened to be the most stagnant on those high ozone days. And that really can exacerbate ozone. When you can't flush the basin out, you can really get accumulation of ozone. So we think that also played a role. Moving on to the next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll focus a bit on emissions in 2020. Next slide. This is slide 15. So the elephant in the room, and as we speak, there's actually a fire burning in the Idlewild area. So granted, this is 2021, but the elephant in the room in 2020 was this record wildfire season that we saw all over the state. So just to provide some context, so this is a plot showing the wildfire burn area in California from 87 on to 2020. So before 2020, the previous record was recorded in 2018, where we burned a bit less than 2 million acres. So as of the end of 2020, we've burned over 4.2 million acres in the state. So we more than doubled the previous record for acres burned. And a lot of those acres, not the majority, but a lot of those acres were burned in our area. And just to give you a sense of that, if we go on to the next slide. So this is a satellite image taken from September 13th. And you can see all the smoke over our basin. So we saw impacts from transport from these fires in Central and Northern California. And then we also saw a lot of impacts from local fires. So the Bobcat fire was a huge source of emissions kind of right in this LA and the San Fernando Valley area. And then also El Dorado fire. There was also which you can see on this satellite imagery, but we also had, big fires like the Silverado fire, Blue Ridge, Ranch 2, Apple Fire, Snow Fire, and then right now, which is the Bonita Fire. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, please. So we think this is still preliminary, but we think that these wildfire plumes may have led to higher ozone. So we know they are a source of NOx and VOCs. So we're looking into this, but our preliminary analysis indicates that there were some increases in ozone in areas that were downwind of the Bobcat fire, and that may have led to some of these higher days. So basically, if we look at just the top 10 ozone days we recorded this year, we did see some increases on the order of a few ppb in these stations that were downwind of the Bobcat fire, which is mainly kind of the Los Angeles area, Western LA County, and the San Fernando Valley. Next slide, please. So it's also possible that changes in emissions due to changes in behavior from COVID may have also contributed. And I presented this a while ago, maybe back in April to the board, and presented it again maybe in November. And we're starting to piece this picture more and more together. So we have a pretty good sense of what's happened with NOx concentrations, NOx emissions in the basin due to COVID, where we saw pretty significant emission reductions in April, May, and June. In July, things became a bit more modest. And then August through October, things were fairly typical to past years. Granted, there's some variation year to year, but they were pretty typical compared to past years. Our lab has been looking a bit at changes in VOC emissions. And some early lab data indicates that there are increased emissions from specific VOCs, like the VOCs that were used for disinfecting, mainly ethanol and hand sanitizers and isopropanol. However, the total VOC levels are pretty similar to what we've seen during the past few years. So all in all, we think total VOC is pretty similar to past years, which on the surface, maybe you would expect that they would have gone down, but they're pretty similar to past years. However, we like to group VOCs all together as one, but in reality, VOCs are thousands of different compounds that all have different reactivities. So we're looking into the impact that we may have, shifted the reactivity of this VOC mixture due to COVID. Next slide, please. Okay, so we need to look at how these changes in emissions may have affected our ozone concentrations. And ozone chemistry is very complicated and very nonlinear. This is a conceptual plot that tries to capture our understanding of ozone chemistry. And this understanding we have from both ozone measurements and models and kind of basic atmospheric chemistry and kinetics. So this plot shows ozone production on the y-axis and NOx concentration on the x-axis. So there are three curves for different levels of VOCs. So if we assume that VOC concentrations were constant between pre-COVID and during COVID, we should be moving along one of these curves, right? Moving along constant VOCs. So one thing to notice about all three of these curves, there's this peak in the top of the curve, which is shown with the X. So we think that most of the basin were on the right side of this peak, and we call this the VOC limited regime. This means that we expect an increase in ozone production as we decrease NOx, but keep VOC constant. And that's what we think may have happened this year. Granted, this is all preliminary, but if we're on the right side of that peak, you decrease NOx and keep VOC constant, you do see an increase in ozone concentration. Now, the good news is we have a lot of evidence suggesting that we're very close to the top of this curve. So if we were on the other side of that peak, we would have seen decreases in ozone under this scenario. And then another thing that's really important is that what happened with COVID is not the same as our ozone control strategy, right? Our ozone control strategy is heavy on Knox, but it also has some VOC reductions. And when you reduce VOCs at the same time, it kind of allows you to cheat. It allows you to, you don't have to stay on that same curve. So our strategy allows us, if we reduce VOCs at the same time, it allows us to move down to a lower curve. So in our AQMP, that's the way that we try and avoid this increase in ozone. So we decrease Knox heavily. We also decrease VOCs a bit, and that allows us to avoid this increase in ozone. So that kind of makes us move more horizontally through this space. Okay, so moving on, if we go to the next slide, we'll switch gears to PM 2.5. And I'll just do this briefly. And then if we move to the next slide here. So you can see PM 2.5 depends on many of the same factors that ozone does. So the emissions blend is a bit different. So, you know, PM 2.5 is very dependent on wildfire smoke, because that's kind of the main component that wildfires produce. And then also fireworks are important. And then just like ozone, mixing and ventilation is really important. Sunlight can play a role in the formation of some PM 2.5 compounds. And then fog and humidity are important. So we tend to see high PM 2.5 levels when we have kind of these foggy, kind of cool, calm winter mornings. And then also storms are really important. So anytime you have a storm blow through, you can get rain, which was a really effective way of cleaning the atmosphere, but you also get a lot of mixing and a lot of dispersion. You break up that inversion layer, and we can get really clean PM 2.5 concentrations. Next slide, please. Okay, so this table shows the number of exceedances we've recorded per month from 2015 to the end of October of this year. We're still evaluating the data from November and December. So in recent years, the vast majority of our PM 2.5 exceedances occurred from November to March. The summer and fall fires, along with Independence Day fireworks, can lead to exceedances outside these periods. And that's what we saw this year, where PM 2.5 was generally very clean, except for periods where we had fires and Independence Day, which affects concentrations on both the 4th and the 5th. So fortunately, if we move to the next slide, there's this carve out in the Clean Air Act where we're allowed to, when looking at attainment, we're allowed to remove exceedances that were created by factors that are essentially out of our control. And we call those exceptional events. So we're still concerned about those days where there's high concentrations, because it does affect health. You know, your lungs don't care if it came from something that we could control or not control. So we care about them. You know, we try and help people avoid exposures on those bad days. But when we go to calculate attainment, we want to remove those days because we can't control them. So wildfires and Independence Day fireworks are both considered exceptional events by the EPA. And if we can demonstrate that the exceedances were caused by these events, we do this lengthy documentation process, which falls to the staff in my group. And if EPA concurs with our demonstration, we're allowed to remove those days when determining attainment of federal standards. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, let's look at our progress towards attainment of the PM 2.5 standards. So there are 2 PM 2.5 standards that we're trying to attain. So the plot on the left shows the annual standard, and that has a 2025 attainment year. And you can see we're kind of marching along. Last year, 2019 was the cleanest year on record. We don't yet have the complete data set for 2020, so we can't calculate this yet. But we're sort of marching along, and we're still on track to attain the annual standard by 2025. And then the 24-hour standard, we need to attain it by the end of this year. Actually, we should have attained it last year, but we missed attainment. So we're trying to attain it as early as possible. And you can see we don't have all of the filter measurements yet for 2020 because it takes a while to analyze that data. We're expecting to see that in the next month and a half. But for now, if we look at just the first 3 quarters, we're still on track to attain. And while we don't have our filter-based measurements, which we use for attainment, we do have measurements from continuous monitors, which are used for air quality forecasting and real-time air quality data. And those monitors look pretty clean. So we can't promise anything yet, but we think it looks pretty good for attainment in 2020. However, this will be heavily dependent on removing some data for the exceptional events that we recorded in 2020, mainly with the wildfires and 4th of July. Move to the next slide, please. So the conclusions, I'm going to split up in 2 slides. So first, the scientific conclusions. So we think that all this high ozone that we recorded in 2020 were due to several reasons. So one is these record high temperatures, the stagnant meteorology that we recorded, which was much more stagnant than we've seen in the past several years, increased emissions of both VOCs and Knox from these wildfires that we saw, and then also these possible changes in emissions and the ratio of Knox to VOCs that we saw due to behavior from the COVID response. And I presented all these factors and kind of hypothesized them, but figuring out the relative impacts of each of these factors is really complicated, and that's going to take time. We're probably not going to be able to do that alone. I mean, the entire academic community is looking at this now, and we'll hopefully see some papers in the near future. And then the high PM 2.5 that we reported during the summer of 2020 has been attributed primarily to local fires that we saw, and then smoke transport from fires all along the West Coast. If we move to the next slide. So this is my last slide here. So here's our conclusions on how this will affect attainment, how 2020 affects attainment. So the first is a 24-hour PM 2.5 standard. So the filter-based data that we have so far from quarters 1 through 3, and then the continuous data, which we don't use for attainment, but it gives us a good sense from quarter 4, indicate that it's very likely we've attained the 24-hour standard. However, we need to successfully demonstrate these exceptional events. They need to be approved by EPA, and that's critical. So that's pretty rosy picture. The 1-hour standard is not as rosy. So based on the preliminary 2020 data, it looks like we will fail to attain the 1-hour standard by the 2022 deadline. And that's because we recorded more than 3 exceedances at a single station during this 2020 to 2022 period, which is what the standard is based upon. The 8-hour ozone standard, so 2020 won't play a role in determining attainment because that's based on 2021 to 2023 period. And then kind of our overall ozone attainment goals, one of the questions that comes up is, well, how much of this, abnormal meteorology and abnormally high amount of wildfire events is due to a changing climate? And how will that affect attainment of future standards? And we don't know yet. We're funding a study to look exactly at this question, but it's possible that a changing climate, if we have more of these events, attainment of future standards is going to be harder than we expected. So that's all I had, and I can take any questions.
Questions, comments? Rita, go ahead.
Thank you, Scott, for the presentation. I had a question on your slide 26 under the 1-hour ozone standard. What is the district's plan for in moving forward with this? Like, what are we telling EPA? What is the plan? Are we, doing a different attainment demonstration, or how does the district plan to overcome that setback?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first thing I'll say is that this is all based on preliminary data, so we need to wait till everything's validated before doing too much. But unfortunately, that answer is a bit above my pay grade, and that probably is a question more for Dr. Fein or Dr. Reese. So if you want, we can get back to you with a more comprehensive answer.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, I can't see my presentation list or participant list. There we go. Bill Lamar, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I have a somewhat similar question that Rita just raised. In looking at your presentation, it looks like the reason we're not going to come into attainment on one, and is problematic maybe on some others, is mostly due to exceptional events. Everything that I've read looks like looks like 2021. We still have the pandemic for God knows how long. We're going to have a very dry year with very little rainfall. So the drought conditions are going to exist or get worse. Wildfires, as you pointed out, there's already one, and we're still in January, and we haven't even touched our summer season yet. So these are all events that the district, it's beyond the control of the district. It seems that you said that you're going to work your hypothesis with the academic community. Is there anything that the business community can do to support your efforts?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So maybe so first maybe we can talk just a little bit about what the EPA considers exceptional events. So drought and abnormal weather are not considered exceptional events. And you kind of have to go into the fine print a bit in the exceptional events rule. However, wildfires are. So with 1 hour ozone, we're always looking at, well, if we remove the days where we had wildfires, would we attain 1 hour ozone? And the question is no, it wouldn't have enough of an impact. We're pretty far out of attainment with 1 hour ozone that it wouldn't have enough of an impact even if we remove those days to attain 1 hour ozone. However, 24-hour PM 2.5, yeah, it does. We think it will bring us into attainment if we're able to successfully demonstrate those days. But unfortunately, drought and abnormal weather doesn't qualify. And I'm not quite sure. I don't think, we'll have to talk with EPA, but I don't think that COVID changes in emissions due to COVID would meet that definition either. But as for how the business community can help with that, that's a good question. I mean, I think it could be useful. This is a public process for these exceptional event demonstrations, and my sense is they're very important. I'm not sure it gets the public attention that it should merit. A good thing is when we do the public process for these demonstrations, it'd be great to have participation, at some of these meetings and look through the reports and provide feedback and suggestions and let us know if there's things that you think that we missed, because, a tighter demonstration is beneficial for everybody, right?
Well, I guess I beg to differ with you a little bit. The public is seeing it. It's not that they're not seeing it, only they're just not recognizing it. With business closures, I know, but about everything we hear, it has to do with restaurants. But I can tell you that in the Alliance, there's a number of businesses that are on the verge of bankruptcy. Or have already gone out of business because of this. Either they can't open, or their business operations have been sporadic, or the clients, the customers that they service are the same way. Certainly, Jeff Blake can tell you from his metal finishers. So. It is they are seeing it, but it's just kind of lost in this mix of exceptional events or just unprecedented events that are visiting us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wasn't speaking to that. I was speaking to the question of how can the business community help us with this process of excluding the data that occurred due to exceptional events. And my sense is that when we go through this public process of writing these events and making a demonstration to EPA that these things were exceptional, I think the way the business community, the way any community can help with that is participate in that process to make sure we didn't miss anything, to provide the strongest evidence that these events that occurred were truly exceptional and meet the definition that EPA has.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a question regarding the amount of fuel that's been burned in 2020 compared to previous years. There's obviously been a great reduction in the amount of vehicular traffic. And how does that number fit into this overall picture?
Yeah. So right when the safer at home orders were implemented, in mid-March or early March, and the roads were empty, right? There was like 80% reduction in vehicle traffic, in light duty vehicle traffic. However, heavy duty vehicle traffic was only down not really that much. At the beginning it was down maybe 25%, but it rapidly went down to 10%. And now things are pretty normal. And it turns out for ozone, we care a lot about Knox, right? And light duty vehicles are only responsible for like 5% of our basin's Knox, whereas trucks are responsible for about 35%. And that's on road alone is 35%. So what happened was you drive around and you look and you say, oh, the roads are empty. It's like, yeah, they're empty of cars, but the trucks are still running. So we actually didn't see as much Knox reductions as it would appear just by looking at the change in light duty traffic.
Todd Campbell, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I did. I just had it. I too am fascinated by the 1 hour standard, and that we may not meet it in 2022. Does this mean that if EPA deems us not to meet that standard, could we face a FIP and other sanctions as soon as 2022?
So that once again is a Dr. Fein question, but it will trigger a plan requirement. So yeah, based on my
does that mean you could potentially fix it through a AQMP update?
Yeah, I think there may be other actions that need to happen, and I'll defer those questions to Dr. Fein, but I don't think you need to assume that will be the remedy.
So it sounds like I've heard that we need to defer to Dr. Fein at least 2 or 3 times during this presentation. So we can make sure he's on the meeting agenda for next month, and so we can ask those questions if he's not going to be available today.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because of course, my next question was, I always keep on thinking of 2023. So I was wondering what the difference was between, because 2023, I think, my memory's not perfect, but I think that's always been the date that has been pinpointed for a potential FIP risk. And so I just would be good to have clarification there. And maybe we can get that next month.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep,
quick
go ahead.
comment on that. I know several of us are also on the AQMP advisory committee, and I've heard the issue with the 1 hour ozone standard in other staff presentations as well. So I'm guessing that committee will meet sometime soon to discuss that issue. So, that's what I'm guessing that will happen, because it's very concerning because then the one of the remedies is that then the stationary sources get penalized for the failure to attain. And I think, you know, the industry is very much concerned with that.
I agree. All right. Todd and Bill, you guys still have your hands raised. I assume you guys have got your questions in. Any other questions on this item? Any public comment on this item? Not seeing any other hands raised. Scott, great presentation. Thank you. You know, it's always great to hear these updates that sort of fill in some of the holes. But boy, this, as you said quite a few times, not exactly a rosy picture.
No. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, on to item number 6, the update on the incentive programs. Vicki White, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hopefully this will be a little more positive presentation.
Hopefully, and I will try and get through this maybe a little bit quicker pace, because I know that was a great presentation and discussion. So I'm a manager here in our technology advancement office, and I work primarily on our incentive funding programs. I think I was before this this committee a year ago, so this will be basically an update from that period of time. And I just kind of wanted to mention, you know, you may be familiar with incentive funding programs such as the Carl Moyer program. We do have a variety to present today, but these are programs that are primarily focused on achieving emission reductions by replacing older, high polluting vehicles and equipment with cleaner technologies. And these funds, all the funds I'll be discussing in this presentation are focused on those technologies that are certified by the California Air Resources Board, meaning they are available for commercial use in California. These are not funds that are allowed to be spent on demonstration projects, for example, or development of new technologies. These are for commercially available technologies. And anyway, I'll get started. So this is going to be an update on our incentive program activities during the past year. AQMD implements about 150 to 200 million in incentive funding each year. These funds serve many purposes. However, they are primarily designed to reduce emissions beyond those required by existing rules and regulations. Incentives have proven to be an effective strategy in accelerating the deployment of new, cleaner technologies that have become commercialized. They're designed to offset the higher cost of the new, cleaner technologies. The programs are typically designed to provide a higher incentive for the cleanest technologies, such as zero emissions. Vehicles and equipment would be given a higher incentive because they're cleaner equipment. The existing programs, all of the ones that we work with here in the Technology Advancement Office, do require the retirement of an older vehicle, engine, or equipment in order to receive the grant. We are working with CARB to try and open that up to a new purchase option, but so far the programs that we ran last year all require the scrappage of an older vehicle to receive the grant to purchase the newer vehicle. And these emission reductions, these funds carry a requirement that the emission reductions be surplus to existing regulations, meaning they have to go beyond what the regulations require. They cannot pay, we cannot issue a grant to help a company or fleet come into compliance with the regulation. And what started new 2 years ago was we now can allocate the funds for infrastructure that's needed to deploy near zero and zero emission heavy duty vehicles and equipment. Next slide, please. So our incentive programs cover a wide variety of on and off-road mobile sources, including infrastructure, as I mentioned. These incentives have been used to deploy cleaner trucks, transit and school buses, light duty vehicles, refuse haulers, concrete mixers, passenger trains, freight trains, marine vessels, and a variety of very diverse category of off-road equipment, including construction and agricultural equipment. Next slide, please. This slide shows the main incentive programs that have involved sustained funding over multiple years. You may recognize this slide from last year. We just updated it with, the 2020 program results that we have. The Carl Moyer program is our longest standing program. We're entering the 23rd year of implementation of this program. And for those of you that may not be aware, it's a program that targets the replacement of older heavy duty vehicles and equipment, including both on and off-road equipment. The on-road equipment includes, all the various vocations for heavy duty on-road applications. And off-road, it includes not just construction and ag, but also marine vessels, locomotives, to some degree, shore power for ships that are berthing, and cargo handling equipment, and again, infrastructure. That's a relatively new addition to the Carl Moyer program. And then these are just the program results since inception, since the first year of implementation. The Prop 1B program, you may be aware, that's also called the Goods Movement Emission Reduction Program. This program really got started in 2009, and it was intended to reduce diesel emissions from the goods movement sector. So its focus is on funding the replacement of older, equipment, vehicles and equipment that are used to haul freight and engage in freight movement. So that includes freight trucks, both drayage, non-drayage, again, shore power for ships that are berthed, freight locomotives, cargo handling equipment. I think you get the picture. This program is in the final stage of funding. So we currently have an open solicitation for heavy duty trucks. If you're interested in that, I think I have both a link, and you're also welcome to give me a call if you have more specifics regarding that open solicitation. You may have heard of our Replace Your Ride program. This program is funded by grants, GGRF grants from the California Air Resources Board. It's a program that targets the replacement of light duty vehicles with cleaner models. And we initiated this program. South Coast was one of the first districts to initiate this program back in 2015. We've brought it a long way with, basically our vouchers that we issue now have outpaced the amount of funding that we get from CARB. So there are occasions when we run out of CARB money where we have to put currently we have a moratorium on the program. We're not accepting new applications until we get the additional funding from CARB. And we have been strategizing with CARB to get the future allocations of funding sooner, since we have such a high demand for this program. And finally, another kind of longer term program is our lower emission school bus program. We do use our local DMV revenues that we get from DMV for this program. Very successful. It's been around since 2001. It initially, it is targeted on replacing diesel school buses. And the program has evolved over the years. I think I'll show some results a little bit later based on the prior solicitation that we did last year and what those results look like. Next slide, please. So in addition to those kind of sustained funding programs, we also have other programs, including the Community Air Protection Program. This program, what I'm referring to is the incentives part of this program. So along with AB 617, the legislators set aside incentive funds that are intended to reduce emissions in AB 617 communities, as well as other disadvantaged and low-income communities. And I'll give a little more description of that later on. You may have heard we actually have a voucher incentive program that is targeted for truck replacements with small fleets. And what I mean by small fleets are these fleets that have 10 or fewer vehicles in terms of a fleet total. I already mentioned our Replace Your Ride program. I think it was about a year ago, CARB changed the name of this program to Clean Cars for All. We still use the branding of Replace Your Ride, but on a state level, it's referred to as Clean Cars for All, just so you know. We also have been running a pretty successful commercial electric lawn and garden equipment exchange program. You may have heard of the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust. I'll be giving a quick update on that program in the next few slides. And we have also implemented the Farmer program. This is a statewide program in which air districts get allocations for specifically for replacement of farm equipment. Next slide, please. So given the variety of incentive programs that we have, this slide basically shows the results of these programs based on implementation in 2020. This includes funding that was allocated for each of the programs I mentioned, the number of vehicles and equipment involved, and the estimated NOx and PM reductions. The majority of these programs, except for EFMP, involve the replacement of an older diesel equipment. So a lot of these PM reductions that are shown here are diesel PM reductions from these projects. Pretty good results. Like I said, incentives are an effective strategy. We just don't typically have sufficient funds for the amount of funding requests we get. So we're often oversubscribed for the programs. Next slide, please. So we often get asked for the various programs we have that fund, cleaner heavy duty trucks, how much investment has gone into specifically near zero, lower NOx trucks and zero emission trucks. So we update the slide pretty much every quarter with our results. And as time goes on, of course, we're anticipating to see more and more zero emission trucks be funded. This started back in 2017 with the first introduction of the low NOx engine availability for heavy duty trucks. So these are totals based on the two main programs that we have that are funding heavy duty trucks, including Prop 1B and Moyer, as well as our community air protection program. So this adds up to so far to about 120 million in investment so far. And like I said, as more zero emission vehicles become commercialized, we expect the Z numbers to increase significantly in the next 1 to 3 years. Next slide, please. The district is also working on the 3rd year allocation of the CAP incentives. The project funds for the first 2 years of this program have been fully allocated, with deployments in place or currently in progress. Staff are currently working with the AB 617 community steering committees to develop project plans and finalize the investment strategy for the 3rd year allocation of these incentive funds. Next slide, please. This slide shows the results of projects selected under the 1st and 2nd year community air protection incentives. It identifies the various categories of vehicles and equipment that have been funded in the first 2 years of the program. We do have a detailed list of these projects because the slide is, I know, hard to see. On our CAP incentives website, I actually have a link to this in the last slide of this presentation. It gives very, very details of these projects, but I think this slide is important just to show the variety of mobile sources that are funded through the first 2 years of the program. It includes both on and off-road equipment. Next slide, please. The district also implements incentives that are available through AB 923 DMV registration funds that we receive. These funds are used as match funds that are required by air districts to participate in the Carl Moyer program. The match commitment our air district has to make to receive the Carl Moyer grant funds from the California Resources Board is about $5 million each year. We also use these funds for other important programs to the air district, including our lower emission school bus program that we run every year. And more recently, a project with Metrolink to replace several older high polluting passenger trains with cleaner locomotives. Next slide, please. So our lower emission school bus program has been successful in replacing older diesel school buses with low NOx and zero emission buses. The way the program works, it is currently only applicable to public school districts, including joint power authorities, charter schools, and private transportation providers that are under contract with the public school district. We have been working with CARB to try and expand this program to include private transportation, or school districts that rely on private transportation services. We think that that might be an important aspect to this program as well. It does prioritize replacing the oldest school buses first. We just recently got to extend the model year eligibility up to 2000 and older. Prior to this year, it was 1994 school buses and older that were eligible for the grant, but now it's 2000 and older. So the way it works is the school districts are required to pay a match to get the grant. And South Coast tries to leverage our funds that we have with funds that may be available through the HVIP program. The HVIP program is another CARB funded program administered by CalSTART. Very successful program. So we are allowed to commingle our local funds with the HVIP funds. So we're going to be working with them as we move forward on this program this year to hopefully maximize, the funds that we have to be able to fund more buses. That's how this program works. Next slide, please. And this slide shows the school bus awards we made in the previous round. These buses are all deployed and in service. I know many of them are restricted from operating right now due to the school closures. But I did want to point out we have a new program announcement that's currently out, but it closes on January 26th. So we've already received applications from about 18 public school districts. So if you know of any that want to apply for near zero or zero emission buses, please send them our way. We'd be happy to help them and see if there's anything we can do to encourage participation. Next slide, please. You may have heard of the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Program. This is a program that's, it's related to the settlement with Volkswagen. It set aside about $423 million in mitigation funds. Now, these mitigation funds, CARB is the lead agency for, and CARB decided to work with the 3 larger air districts in California to run this statewide program. So there are 5 funding categories to this program, and they're listed here. South Coast AQMD is the administrator of 2 of the project funding categories, namely zero emission Class 8 freight and port drayage trucks, and what we call the combustion category. This is a category that is intended for combustion equipment, as part of freight trucks and marine projects, but it includes a kind of a mix. It's not just freight trucks, but it also includes waste haulers, dump trucks, other types of trucks. And the other air district programs are here as well. So I'm gonna go ahead, next slide, please, and I'll give a quick update. So 2020 was, actually it started late 2019, was the first round of solicitations issued for the program. And again, it's important to note that these funding categories, the 5 funding categories, are going to be administered by a single air district, but they're going to be implemented on a statewide basis. So you do have a single air district administering that funding category, but it's open for the entire state, just to be clear. So this slide just shows the current status of solicitations issued under the Volkswagen program so far. Next slide, please. And looking forward, we have several funding opportunities either in progress now or planned for 2021. I wanted to highlight lower emission school bus program I mentioned closes January 26th. We now have an online application portal to make it easier for school districts to apply. We do have our voucher incentive program for small fleets. We anticipate that to open next month. That basically, like I said, is for small fleets that want to get into a new cleaner truck. And our Carl Moyer program, we released that in March of every year. So we are planning to release the new program announcement in March of this year. And our Prop 1B goods movement, even though it's in its final stage of funding, we still have a fair amount of funding left, about 30 million left for heavy duty trucks. And that program closes April 30th. Volkswagen, the combustion category for Volkswagen will be next. It's looking to open up a new solicitation, as well as the zero emission freight and marine and light duty infrastructure, all in Q2 of this year. So keep your eyes open for that. Our community air protection incentives, we are working with the AB 617 communities, but we anticipate funding to be available this year. We just are working to develop the project plans for that in those communities. And other programs, we do get a lot of other smaller grants that may be one-time grants, but they do open up funding opportunities. And I think that's it. Next slide, please. So here are all the links for the programs I mentioned. And of course, myself and our incentives team are more than happy to help anyone that has any interest in these programs. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. I see Rita, you have your hand up. First off, great presentation. Thank you. And it's a good update from last year. Rita, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Vicki. Yeah, I had a couple of questions on the CAP program. I think it was your slide 8. First, is that funding restricted to mobile sources only? And the second question I had, I just wanted to get an update on the two bills, the SB 856 and AB 74 that you had on your slide.
Oh, sure. This program is still in the development stage. So the first year of funding, the first year of CAP incentives, and maybe that's what triggered your question, was basically directed by the legislator to use those funds specifically for mobile source projects submitted under existing programs, including Prop 1B and Moyers. So that was the first year of CAP incentives. And we did have, 80% of those funds had to be spent on disadvantaged low-income communities. This was all before any of the 617 communities have been identified. So we have done that with year 1. Year 2, you mentioned SB 856. Those funds have all been allocated. What happened with year 2 CAP incentives was CARB opened up some additional categories. It wasn't very extensive. So in addition to mobile sources submitted under the existing Carl Moyer Prop 1B, we also had a little wiggle room to use those funds for other purposes. And our district, based on community input, set aside some of those funds. I think it was about 6 million of those funds for school air filtration in the communities, and another 6 million to reduce hexavalent chromium emissions at plating facilities. So that was year 2. We got to kind of branch out from the existing programs and look at other things besides mobile sources. Year 3, again, mobile sources are eligible. We still have those additional categories, but CARB added one more additional category, what they call community identified projects and stationary sources. They have one chapter for both those categories. And the process for that is that if we identify an action that's part of a SERP in one of the communities, that's not part of an existing guideline, they want us to develop a project plan. So that's where we're at right now. We're going to be getting input from the communities. We're going to prioritize and we're going to develop a project plan that can be approved by CARB so that we can use the incentives for those project types. I think CARB still wants some certainty that these funds, incentive funds, are going to be used according to some protocol, some, we have to demonstrate they can generate some emission reductions, things like that. So that's where we're at with year 3. I hope that answered your questions. Okay.
Todd Campbell, go ahead.
We try our best with these programs, and I think, our Achilles heel in the basin is always mobile sources. because we're not getting a lot of help from Sacramento and in terms of direction, and it seems like, you know, no amount is ever enough. But I guess my question for staff, and maybe this is a question to Derek, is I know we aren't, well, at least I don't think we're moving forward with any legislation to do some sort of tax or, you know, sales tax, or at least propose it or consider it. Is the district thinking in any way, shape, or form to increase its ability to address mobile sources, you know, outside of the governor's $1.5 billion allocation within this year's budget?
Want me to answer, Vice Chair?
Sure.
Okay. Thanks, Todd. It's good questions, especially coming, that's, you know, mobile sources are our biggest problem. Are you talking about from a regulatory standpoint, or are you just talking about from an incentive standpoint, or both?
Well, I'd love to see you guys pass something from a regulatory standpoint, but I think you're probably, at least from the discussions and based on, you know, the AQMP, I was trying to see if you guys were going to try to figure out another way to get at the shortfall of funding that we need, because, you know, from what I understand, we need about $2 billion a year. We're well behind that number.
Yeah, so you're right. Are you right about the regulatory? I don't think CARB is going to give it up, and I don't think the federal government is going to give it up. So we'll continue to have our very minimal authority over public fleets, but that's as close as we're going to get to mobile. Maybe, you know, ISRs, maybe, you know, one thing, and working with the railroads. But getting back to the incentives, there's no plans for us to seek another piece of legislation, but I will say that there is already discussion about, you know, a possible statewide ballot to address climate change, and within the climate change, there's some issues on incentivizing mobile sources. We're not leading that. We haven't taken a position on it, but I've heard, you know, Denny Zane is still out there and being active, and he's having forums on it. So I think that's probably the extent of where we're going to go as an agency. You know, we're not going to seek any more legislation as of right now. We're not. There's no talk about that to raise the sales tax, but we do need more money, and we're still actively going to the federal government and state government trying to get more money. You know, that's as much as I could say.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess I just want to share an observation with this committee, because I think our failure to attain, you know, will have an impact on all of us economically in one shape or another, whether that comes in the form of a FIP or some other draconian measures that get you know, shoved down our throats in the next couple of years, and then again in 2031, because quite honestly, the Air Board's regulatory actions fall far short of goal. And I think Board Member Judy Mitchell has pointed out several times at the state level. But just to give you a little bit of perspective, most recently, Assembly Member Rudy Salas issued a letter to the Legislative Analyst's Office asking for several questions to be answered with regards to the governor's new executive order that would phase out the sale of passenger cars by 2035 and heavy duty trucks by 2045. And while those answers from the LAO were always caveated or couched with, it depends on how they, Air Board and other agencies decide to implement the executive order. The one eye-opening fact that came out of, or I guess estimate, not fact, but estimate that came out from that response from the LAO was that just the infrastructure alone will cost tens of billions of dollars to the state. Meanwhile, that's not taking into account vehicle incentives or renewable power that would need to be generated for that one particular strategy to be implemented. I should also note that the $1.5 billion, 465 million, comes from greenhouse gas reduction funds, and that's all well and good. But the $1 billion that's being floated will essentially be from vehicle registration and smog fees through 2045. So the $1 billion will be spent in 2023, but we won't have all that money collected till 2045, assuming that we get an extension of those fees in 2024. I'm sure we will. But just think about that. We're going to be having these fees till 2045, 24 years from now, that will finally, pay off the $1 billion that we're going to spend next year on infrastructure. And if tens of billions of dollars are going to be required to be able to do this, I think AQMD and the San Joaquin Valley should be mad like hell and be going after Sacramento and saying, hey, wake up. You need to do some real action here. We need near-term emissions reductions. And rather than spend, a ton of money, a boatload of money on something that may work, you're essentially screwing us from being attainment.
Yeah, we've expressed that. We appreciate the governor's proposal for 2035 and 2045, but it doesn't do anything for us now. And we've made sure our consultants in Sacramento have gone to the governor's office to express our disappointment, not in so much as program, but the fact that, there's some real significant progress we can make right now if he, tweaked a little bit to let us, get funding or access or make it mandatory, whatever you want to call it, to, for some technology that's available now. It could be a minimum. Here's the minimum. And then by the time it's available, fully available, then you reach this plateau up here. But I just want to also say that I think with the new administration in DC, he's looking at an infrastructure bill in the next 100 days. And our understanding from our consultants in DC is there's going to be a significant chunk of change. And I know this is not going to be any music to your ears, Todd, but he's looking at a significant chunk of change going to EV, which it'll help us, but it's nationwide, and we'll probably get a small percentage of that. But we got to look at all our options that's out there. But I know the near zero takes off 90% of the problem right off the bat, and it's available. And unfortunately, they're I don't know if the administration is looking at strictly at EV and not looking at near zero. So, and that's really not, we could advocate, but I think he's got his own agenda, what he wants to do, and his own, his own drive for whatever that is.
It will be interesting to see where the Biden administration goes, but I just would say this. I've yet to see a federal program that's bigger than a California state program, so that tells me, right there, again, let's just say we get another $1.5 billion. It's still not enough. We needed to spend $5 billion for the next 4 years to even be on track with what they're trying to estimate. So
totally agree, Todd.
Anyway, so it's frustrating, and unfortunately, everyone on this call will be affected by it. We should be mad like hell.
And Todd, you brought up a good point a little while ago about the draconian measures they could take against us. We've been advocating that for, probably for about 4 or 5 years, and, it falls on deaf ears, and we'll see once it hits where people are at. And, they're going to turn around and blame us, of course. Well, you didn't do your job. You guys weren't advocating hard enough. Oh no, we were, but where are the partners in this? Where's everybody who's going to be affected by this, whether it be big business, small business, individuals, whoever it is? Where were you? Did you support us on some of the programs we were advocating for? So, but we're government and we can be slapped around and we got to take it. And we understand that, but I'm not going to feel like we didn't try. We tried, but we would just, it fell on deaf ears. People don't think about the future. They just think about what's happening now, which is understandable, but the future is going to come and you're going to have to pay the price in the future. So
Just to be clear, we're not advocating for draconian measures.
I absolutely not.
No, yeah. Well, don't give up and thank you. Yeah. I know we're running late.
Todd, you have your hand raised? Go ahead. I'm sorry, David Rothbard. Todd, you did good.
Thank you. Very quick on a similar thought process. Derek, you said something that caught my attention as far as we're not pursuing legislation and getting authority to raise taxes wherever we're going to get money. I'm thinking about the AQMP, where 2016 we relied on incentive funding to get the reductions we need. If we're now saying we cannot fulfill what we promised in the 2016 AQMP, is that a problem? So this is another Philip Fein question, but I'm just raising that as far as, is that going to be problematic as far as draconian measures of follow-up from EPA if we're unable to follow our own plan?
Well, I think, I don't know if Phil's on the line, but I know we submitted a plan in 2020 for 2023. Whether they accept it or not, EPA accepts it or not, we're waiting to hear from them. But you're right. The AQMP did call for over $1 billion a year of investments, and we didn't get it. So,
I just wanted to bring it up, and it's a good discussion with Philip Fein as far as how we're going to deal with that. And as Bill and I talk about a lot of times, we're worried about Section 185 coming down on stationary sources rather than where the problem is in the mobile sources. So it's something we really need to think about.
Just like I said earlier, everybody's going to suffer on this. Everybody.
Well, hopefully it should go towards the problem rather than the folks that have already put in controls. That's my point. And, we tried to explain that for a Cleaner Act change. I understand that's not going to go anywhere quickly, but it's just what's reasonable moving forward to get where we want to go.
If you need to get mobile sources off the road, it's going to affect no matter what, all of us. We all take a car, we all drive, we all haul our goods. We have buses on the road. Granted they're near zero, but still it's going to affect us all, and that's the sad part.
Hey, we're doing our fair share right now by telecommuting.
I agree, but as I look out my window, I still see a lot of trucks on the road.
Agreed.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, a lot of trucks that are still avoiding a container fee when they come out of the port. So there's a lot of avoidance that's been going on for far too long in different avenues of that, and especially when they agreed to do that at some point and they backed off on that. It's very frustrating. Rita, I see you put your hand back up there. Hopefully it's not to slap me back down on container fees.
No, just to share a thought, because we've often said that that's why we advocate for incentives for manufacturing to stay here in the South Coast, because if you manufacture the goods here, then you don't have to truck them in or ship them in. So I definitely support the district, and count me in to partner in whatever you need for incentives for manufacturing, and to keep that here in the South Coast. I mean, you've heard me say that many times through my Rule 219, rulemaking, participation, and all that. And that's the point, that if we keep manufacturing here, then goods movement might benefit from that.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, Vicki, great presentation. And again, thank you. And stirred up a lot of good conversation. All right. With that, we have our written reports that are attached. Item number 7. Anyone have any questions or comments on those? Public comment on that? Not seeing anybody. Any other business by the body? No other business? All right. Any public comment on items not on the agenda? I'm not seeing anyone in the attendees side, so I'm going to take that as a no. Oh, John, did you have other business? Go
yes.
ahead.
Assuming that the CV-19, Derek mentioned later that we would probably not have an in-person meeting during this term. Is that correct?
So I think what I said was I don't foresee us coming back until late summer at the earliest. We're dark in July, depending on when the COVID shots are available, the vaccines are available, and people take them. You know, and I'm just telling you from, you know, the talk right now at the district is how we were working before is not how we're going to be working in the future. So it may be, you know, a staggered staffing, and telecommuting is probably here to stay with us. And same thing, I think this is probably going to be the venue. I think, you know, this is my opinion, is I think there may be two options in the future. One is well, the option is either to continue just having these, or another option may be a hybrid of, if folks want to come in, they can come in if the meetings are going to be held here at the district, but I would imagine they're going to have to show proof that they got the COVID shot, the vaccine.
Just to let you know, I'm scheduled for a COVID shot. However, I'm a lot older than you, Derek, so that's probably why. But next Wednesday, my wife and I are getting getting the vaccine.
Good for you, John. That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, but I want to say that the Zoom meetings are better than nothing, but in person still, from my perspective, being my age group, is I like to look you in the eye when we're talking about this stuff. And because I think a lot of it, we're missing some of the issues that we probably could be covering better if we were there in person. But thank you for the work that you're doing now. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Mr. Chair, I just have one quick thing to say, and I just wanted to thank you for the statements that you made at the beginning of the meeting this month regarding the Capitol. You're spot on, and I want to thank you for your service. That's it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Any other comments, questions, or the business? One last call for public comment. Oh, John, you have one more.
No, I'm waving at a friend.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. We'll get to your friend. Everyone will be back here February 12th at 11:30. And everyone have a great weekend. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.